Hello, humans. I'm Potos from Cannabetic podcast, and today I Zoom with Veronica from Avo Agency. She's a UX writer, content strategist working with complex industries like healthcare and fintech. So this is a special offer for the cannabis industry because it gives you a peek into the future and how important UX writers will be for the cannabis industry.
Before we start, I wanted to ask you, how many Zoom calls did you have this week or last week since it's Tuesday?
Last week. Maybe like 5 or 6.
What do you do for icebreakers? Like, do you guys do any exercises or, because I always see on LinkedIn now, everybody does like weird stuff. They post that they're like wearing shorts on the shirt,
I only do icebreakers when I'm like hosting a workshop, which I do, maybe like twice a month. And I have like, it depends on what kind of workshop I'm hosting. If it's like a messaging workshop, I have like basically like a messaging Mad Libs that I'll have everyone do. Where like there's something on the screen and they have to fill in the blanks about their brand. Just exercises like that, but not for regular meetings. It's just kind of like, hey guys.
I wanted to try something with you. My teacher, my history teacher, Mr. Pryor, he was a little bit of a nut. And he always had these, I think they're, what's the word? Neuroplasticity, I guess. And
Okay.
you know how you could spin the hands this way, but have you ever tried spinning it the opposite way?
No, wait.
So do it regularly like this, right? It's like a crisscross. Yeah, this is easy, right? But now separate your hands and try to do it opposite ways.
Okay, going that way.
And now try to add the other one.
Wait. I should be better at this because I played piano my whole life, which is like.
And I'm trying to learn piano, and it's so hard. And I don't understand how people could play like higher notes.
Yeah.
But awesome. Thank you for coming on again. I was following you since 2017. It's kind of funny coincidence. I was still in Chicago. I went to a UX panel talk, or is it design panel talk? And it was kind of hilarious. It was a foreign girl. I think she was Polish, and she's a girl that introduced me to UX writing. Her name was Eva, which is kind of. And you have Avo Agency. But I joined a whole bunch of Facebook groups after, and it was hilarious how I got in contact with your content. Somebody posted in one of the design groups, which piece was, I think it was a content strategy for startups and Medium, which got a lot of hits. Somebody posted, check this shit out. And when designers say that, you have to click on it. After that, that was the whole thing where my whole mindset changed. And I was only like the first year in UX, and being a junior, you're still just learning and constantly changing the way you think. But one of the things that I highlighted on there that you said, I don't want to botch it, but something along the lines that if you're just brainstorming content instead of actually aligning your content, like who the audience, you're wasting time. And that's where like the whole workshop thing started for me, the design sprints and being agile and just cutting all the, I guess, fat out and just focusing on what's important. So I wanted to ask you, what does Avo Agency do, and how did you get into the whole remote model too? Because I've been following you, so we're like in the perfect times with the whole coronavirus, and the industries that you worked for done all the work, so it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So my business does content strategy and UX writing remotely, and we've been remote since 2017. We do web content strategy and UX writing, and we work in sprints. So this is definitely on the UX side of content as opposed to the marketing side. Really focused on content for interfaces as opposed to content that might live on a billboard or in a magazine or in a blog even. Really content that helps people, guide their users through an experience, whether it's a website or a mobile app or even something like a touchscreen kiosk. I haven't done any work on like voice user interfaces, but yeah, anything that's like a physical, user interface, that's what we work on.
How did you transition, or what did you do before that you transitioned in 2017 to remote, and how did that whole spiel like work out for you?
Yeah, before that, I was actually in a corporate job. So I was just working in an office. I worked for a Fortune 500 financial services company, and I worked on the UX strategy team. So I was a content strategist there, but on our team, we also had information architects. And then we worked a lot with like UX designers who were more like doing the visual UX UI design. So that's where I came from was, working in an office, collaborating with people in person, and working on really large like enterprise problems, which get very complicated and very messy, and you have to deal with a lot of red tape and legal. So coming from that world, I really, even though I was starting my business remotely, I feel like I actually took a lot from that experience of working in corporate, because I still mainly work with corporate clients and I can speak their language and I understand all of the things that they're dealing with, which is, well, we have to have brand review and we have to have our legal team review and we have all these regulations that we have to work under. And I can kind of, come in and say, well, I get that. I've been there. I know how to work with that. I know how to work with your team. So yeah, so it's been an interesting transition though, going from, working in house to working remotely. I mean, I've definitely had to learn a lot more about just how to communicate effectively remotely and, tools that make collaboration easier, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Do you remember your first client? Because I always talk about like the first experiences. When I just started off, I was doing just UX for e-commerce stores. I remember the
Okay.
first experience was just horrible. I had dry files, I had links that didn't work, and all that. How did you, I guess, get into that mode where you know exactly what to expect? Because sometimes like the big thing right now is getting not what is it, remote assistance and virtual assistants, and the biggest point is like the communication part. And so do you remember like the first part starting off, like what I guess frictions you encountered?
First projects. So my first project when I left my corporate job was actually, it was through an agency. They subcontracted with me, and it was a project for IBM.
Wow.
So I came out of the gate running. Like, first project was a fairly large project. It was working on an interface for IBM Think, which is their annual conference. Um, and the thing that really struck me in that project was actually just Slack. Because coming from corporate, like we had obviously email and we had a chat platform that was like an internal platform that we used. It wasn't Slack, it was like an enterprise version. But we didn't really use it because you could just walk to someone's desk. And you probably saw everyone on your team in a meeting or like for daily stand up. So we didn't really use like a chat feature. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is literally how you do work. Like you Slack is like, I feel like where so many things happen when you're working remotely, whether it's just answering a quick question for someone on the team or getting your own questions answered, or sharing early versions of your work like before a meeting. So yeah, I think that was it's like simple and mundane, but just transitioning to like being on chat all the time was totally new for me. So yeah.
How did you transition from, there's like this sensation when you go to work, you unconsciously just do it, and when you're at home, you're more likely to screw off. How was that transition, and do you have any tips for anybody?
Oh yeah, totally feel that because so I think my first like 6 weeks, maybe first month or something, when I had left my job and then started my business, it was in the winter. And it was like coming out of Christmas break. So it was like just January. And I was at the time also traveling abroad. So it was like totally not a conducive environment to getting work done. I was working at coffee shops. I was working at home on the couch. And it really did challenge me to figure out like, what is the best working environment for me? I've definitely tested a lot of things. And what I've found is that it really is just a process of trying things and figuring out what works the best for you, because people are so different. Like, I have remote friends that really thrive working from their actual house. Like, they want to be at home. I have friends who have to have like people around them, and they do really well in like an open plan co-working with a lot of other, someone sitting next to them, they can chit chat. For me, I work better alone. I found that it was too distracting for me to be in a coffee shop. Wi-Fi, you don't have a lot of control over. And I also realized that I was not a fan of co-working spaces, which works well for some people, but just not for me. So my ideal scenario, which I don't even have access to anymore because we're in quarantine, was having a private office at a co-working space, because
Mm.
it allowed me to have my own space that I could come to every day and have my desk the way I wanted it, and I could close the door and get work done. But I knew that I at least had the option of other human contact, outside my door. So that was a really nice balance for me. And I think, what people can take away if they're listening is just you have to test things out and see how you work the best and kind of try to optimize your environment to your own, to yourself, because everyone's so different.
I agree. How does the Avo agency model work since you're remote? How do you hire people? Who takes care of the accountant? Like, how do you have everything set up?
Yeah, so just like how things are structured. So I work as the strategist on every project and kind of also the account manager. So for the most parts, clients are interfacing with me. I'll do things like I'll lead an initial kickoff workshop or strategy workshops, and I'll kind of set the pace for the project, and do the bulk of the strategy work. And then when we move into things that are more like tangible, deliverables and assets, I'll have other people come in, whether it's writers, who are doing actual copywriting for the interface that we're working on, or maybe sometimes even a designer who will do things like low fidelity wireframes. We don't do full design, but we will hand off to a client, final copy and things like a content model or information architecture assets like a sitemap or things like that will help them build out the website. And then yeah, we do have a CPA. He's also remote. He's not on staff. He's his own business. But I do have a CPA, which is very very important if you're running your own business. I don't know what I would do without that.
I was listening to a podcast recently. I want to say maybe it was Krista and somebody you had on, and they emphasized that you shouldn't fire your financial people when if you're in that, I guess, in that position right now. Obviously, the creatives take the first hit, but you should keep the people that take care of your money first. And it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting that you mentioned that. I brought you on because you worked in so many very highly regulated industries. I wanted to talk about first, before we move into cannabis, and a few examples I'm going to give you and run through. What was one of the most difficult projects in terms of regulations, compliances that you worked for, and what are the solutions, and how did you come to the other end?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I would say healthcare and finance are probably the most tightly regulated, and I've worked
I'm
quite
type
a
1 diabetic, so I'm in that.
yeah, yeah. As you know, healthcare and financial services are both pretty highly regulated industries, especially in terms of content and what you're able to say. On the financial side, you have to consider things like I don't even know if I'm saying it right. Honestly, promissory language. Like you can't make fake like you can't claim something that's not realistic, or in healthcare too, like you can't write on a product page for a drug like this is gonna make you 10 years younger. Like obviously you wouldn't say that, but those I'm giving unreal examples, but just to try to illustrate it. Yeah, there's a lot of considerations, for both of those industries that you have to be really mindful of. And I find that the best way to handle that is, well, twofold. So in the early stages of a project, I'll try to just get on the phone with whoever is the stakeholder that owns that review process. So if it's like the legal team, that's going to need to review something, I'll see if I can just get a quick, 30-minute basically stakeholder interview with that person and say, like, could you just walk me through, like, what are the big red flags that you look for when you review something for compliance in your department? Do you have any documentation? And usually they're really happy to share that with you, and that saves a lot of time later, because the worst case scenario is that you have a writer or a designer or any type of creative work for a really long time on an asset, and then you have to change it all because of regulation or compliance issues. So just trying to mitigate that as much as possible. And then the second thing I would say is getting those people to review things earlier on in the process. I've talked to writers especially who will say like, oh, I had to completely rewrite something. I got all the way through the process, the main stakeholders signed off, and then it went to compliance and we had to redo a lot of things. And I'm like, well, it shouldn't have gone to compliance at the end of that process. They should have had their eyes on it earlier on, and that would have saved you having to revise it completely, right? So just getting the right people and kind of working iteratively, as we'd say, which is kind of a jargon word in my opinion. But in this case, it really applies. Working quickly and showing early drafts to people helps a lot.
You touched upon that you only work on like the strategy part of the projects. When I transitioned into design sprints and workshops to the whole reason I kind of left the whole deliverable side of things just because I hated it. The only deliverable that I do deliver now is Webflow, which is web design, because I enjoy it and I just don't want to deal with how deliverables towards the end it's a pain. How did you split up the work, or is it something that you kind of grew out of working fully through the project and then streamlining everything and outsourcing and hiring freelance designers, or is it something that you really enjoy and just kind of picked, this is what I'm going to be focusing on the strategy part?
Yeah. So as far as my business, I've been on the strategy side pretty much since I started it. Just because that's kind of where I had come from in my corporate job. So my job before my business was as a content strategist. So I wasn't doing any copywriting or anything like any creative deliverables in my job before I started my business. So it really was never my intention to go from a strategy job to freelancing as a doing creative deliverables. I think it would have felt like a step backwards. Not that creative work is less important. It's just different.
Yes.
I didn't want to change what I was doing. So yeah, but I mean, I think for me, I transitioned more into the strategy side when I started learning more about how to structure a project so that strategy made sense, and clients would sign on, right? So I think when I first started my business, I did struggle with people would come to me for copywriting, and then I would have to sort of backtrack and say, okay, great, we'll do the copywriting, but also we have to do strategy first. And so it was this sort of backward sales process where they would come to me for the end result, which was like the words. And then I would have to get them to be on board with strategy. And now I have it reversed where people actually do come to us for strategy. And I think what changed in between then was just, I mean, it sounds vague and we can dig into it if you want, but like really just positioning and doing a little bit of content marketing that was minimal but really purposeful, like publishing some of those articles on those large medium publications and on my own website, and really getting down my own message a lot clearer, and sort of coming out right out of the gate saying, we are a strategy agency. This is why you should hire us. This is the main benefit of working with us, is because you get strategy, and it just so happens that helps you have better content. So just changing the messaging helped a lot.
You were a content strategist before. Were you specifically doing like articles, or was it actually like UX content?
Yeah, it was UX. So
UX, okay.
Yes, I was on a UX team, and I was doing content strategy and mainly working with our information architects.
Mm-hmm. And how you developed those articles, did you see any insight? Did you gain any insights or like in parallel that resemble the UI projects that you work on, like an interface versus like articles? Because I see some designers, they craft shorter articles, but you could tell that they worked on it really well. And from writer side, I was wondering, did you gain any insights writing articles and kind of going into that type of content, like social media and stuff? And how did that transition over from working on user interfaces and strategizing about positioning and the whole social media side of things?
Yeah, I think that's a fun question because, like you said, like I was coming from a job where I really was only doing strategy for like enterprise websites. And then I started my business and I realized, oh, I have to do my own content marketing now, which is different. Um, so yeah, in terms of writing, like writing blogs and articles and like doing our social media, there was a learning curve with it.
Oh, did you hire somebody or did you do everything yourself?
No, I did it. I did it myself. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But what I will say about that, this is something that I suggest to other people as well, is I think I see a lot of freelancers and early stage business owners try to do everything with their content marketing like really quickly, and they just stretch themselves too thin. They try to post every day on Instagram, and they go live on Facebook, and they try to do 2 blog posts a week, and it's a lot, and I just don't think it's necessary, to be honest. I think that not to say that that's bad, like that will work eventually for sure, but I don't think you need to do it just to get a client. And if it's your first couple of months in business and you're like, I just need to do something that's going to get me work, I think there's an easier way to do it. I don't think you need to be spending 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day, whatever, on your social media. I think for me, the strategy that I used was mainly doing evergreen guest articles. So I would find publications who had large audiences of my ideal audience, and then just write for them. So for example, like that Medium article that you found me through, that was an article for UX Planet, which has a huge readership audience already. That's not something that I could have cultivated on my own, like an audience of that size. That would have taken me years. But it's kind of like a cool shortcut. Like you can just write for those publications and get in front of that audience right away without having to do the years of work to build up the audience yourself. So yeah, and then just making sure those articles are evergreen. Like it's funny you bring up that article that I wrote, that it's called Content Strategy for Startups, which if you
I'm gonna
Google,
post it in links so every like cannabis startup could read about it because it's amazing.
yeah.
Like the guy posted in the Facebook group. Check this shit out.
Yeah, and so like that article now is from I think 2017. Anyway, it's
Yeah.
like a few years old and I still get clients from that article. I haven't touched it, I haven't like updated it, but so that's what I mean by evergreen. Like it's an article that was just foundational knowledge. It's really in depth. It's really actionable. It was posted on a publication with a large audience, and it's probably going to continue to like work for me in terms of bringing me clients for like the foreseeable future. And if I had just done blogs on my own websites, it would have taken me years to like get any traction with a brand new website. Blogging, that would have taken a long time to get to build traffic. It would have taken a lot more effort. And again, I'm not saying that that's bad. Like I blog on my own site now, um, years later, because I do have some web traffic that's meaningful. But day one, if I had posted the same article on my own website, nobody would have seen it. um, so yeah, I'm a big fan of guest posting.
Are you currently doing that too now? Or
I'm not.
what's your social media strategy right now?
Yeah, so I guess I'm in a fun place right now where I feel like I'm just testing new things because I have the bandwidth finally.
Hmm.
Like I'm a few years into my business now and we have like a pretty steady um we get steady inbound leads now. We have people coming to me through some of that old content that's still out there, still getting eyes on it. So now I kind of have the headspace to be like, okay, I'm not like struggling for clients anymore. Now I can really test things. So I started an Instagram account for my business recently, which is just the @Avo Agency. on Instagram. I think we only have like 8 posts so far. So I'm testing that and just seeing, how I might want to use that platform. I haven't done a guest post in a while, but I'm also doing more of these types of engagements, like podcast interviews. I was a guest instructor for a content marketing course recently.
Mm.
So I'm doing more of that type of work now, which I'll say is easier now that I'm a little bit more established. Like, someone with a podcast or with a course can kind of see that, oh, she's been doing this for a while. And so there's a little bit more credibility there for me to be able to do that.
I want to talk about like what was the difference between getting inbound clients from like the article that already want to talk to you versus you creating an outbound strategy and speaking to clients that sometimes are kind of harder, takes a few calls till you break the ice.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So yeah, so inbound, just in case anyone who's listening doesn't know, is like basically sales leads coming to you, and then outbound it would be like doing something like cold outreach. And I actually did a lot of that as well in the beginning. That was kind of my two-prong approach. Is I did some evergreen guest blogs, and then I also did some like cold outreach. For that, I mostly use LinkedIn. Which I think is also a great platform for UX designers, copywriters, and creatives in general. LinkedIn is an incredible tool, but you really have to know how it works and how to use it. I like to say that LinkedIn is a search engine. I think people
Mm.
think of LinkedIn as a social media platform. And if you kind of think of it more like a search engine, uh, you can get a little bit more traction. So what I mean by that is there are a couple cool things you can do with LinkedIn. Like, first of all, everything on your own profile is searchable. So just optimizing your LinkedIn profile for the words that your clients would search for can bring you some interest just from that alone. And the key there is really to think about what your clients would search for. I see a lot of freelancers who will they'll update their LinkedIn profile and they'll put their new title as founder, right? Like they're a
Made
UX
the
designer.
same mistake.
Oh no, sorry.
Like a year ago, I transitioned from CEO to founder because I thought CEO was over the board and it was founder, and now it's like founder, get on me.
Right. And I mean, that's great. But I think the thing is that your ideal client is not going to go to LinkedIn and search for founder. If they want a UX designer, they're going to go on LinkedIn and search UX designer.
Mm-hmm.
So if your title on LinkedIn is founder, you're not going to show up for the people that are actually looking for you. And so just optimizing your profile, thinking about what would my ideal client search for? How can I put that on my profile? That's a big win. And then you can also use it as a search platform, like figuring out who is my ideal client, what is their job title, what size company do I want to target? Because on LinkedIn, you can actually use all of those things as a search filter and look for, I want to find a product manager who lives in San Francisco, that works at this specific company or whatever. Like you can actually do that on LinkedIn because it is a really powerful search platform. And then you can just reach out to those people directly. But the secret sauce behind that is not just reaching out to everybody, right? It's like using it as a search platform, narrowing down your results and reaching out to, the right people. So yeah.
The biggest problem I noticed, I mean, still to this day, is user research and positioning, finding the right audience. We're about half hour in. Can we do a short run through, come up with a concept product, since you're probably familiar with CBD?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so CBD, the new thing right now, how they're targeting is they're focusing on like contextual aspects for sleep, maybe moods, if you want to enhance your mood, if you want to fall asleep faster, if you have gut problems, then there's more from female side of products. So obviously the copy changes over there. But I notice a lot of, and not even notice, I preach on LinkedIn that a lot of cannabis, since we're living under basically like constraints every day of regulations and, ad accounts getting banned, and most of the companies can't even use ad accounts. When it comes from the side of like creating a product and positioning, can we run through a little quick 5-minute tutorial how to find the audience and maybe a few approaches that you do? Like you said, you use LinkedIn, and what really caught my eye that when you search and you could do a custom search of a UX designer that works for a specific industry.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say the concept product is I'm launching CBD oil, and I'm focusing on healthy-minded people. So somebody that's already interested in protein shakes and fitness industry, and maybe my copy is going to be something along the lines of fitness.
Okay. So is the question, how would I find customers, or how would I do customer research on LinkedIn?
Yeah, how would I find customers? Yeah.
Okay. So what I would do if I wanted to target people that were health conscious and I knew maybe like they lived in the US, maybe a couple of other parameters, what I would do is I would actually go on LinkedIn and I would search for content. So on LinkedIn, you can search for people, you can search for businesses, or you can search for content. I would search for content and try to find people that were posting about health and fitness topics. And then I would go in and look at all the people that are posting blog posts and articles and other links that relate to health and fitness. And then if any of those people seemed like they might be influencers, I might reach out to them and see if they wanted to like review the product and post about it. The other thing you could do is look at all the people that are liking and commenting on the health and fitness content, because obviously they have some level of interest. If they're, if Joe posts a blog about CBD health benefits, and then, Melissa comments on it, wow, this is so interesting, I would go and reach out to both of those people. I'd reach out to Joe, who's posting the article, but I'd also reach out to Melissa, who's commenting on the article, because she's obviously somewhat aware of it and she's interested in it. So that's one way that you might use LinkedIn as a search engine to find potential customers, or even to find people who would participate in user research.
Can you give us tips in any other ways besides LinkedIn? If you just started really cold, whether it's email or just Instagram, or what would another way would be?
Yeah, I think any of those. I think if I was doing like Instagram, I might look for people that are well, let me back up a little bit. So one thing that I think of when I'm doing research is direct competitors, but also indirect competitors. So an indirect competitor is someone that is not selling the same product, but they're targeting the same type of people. So I'm trying to think of an example for CBD. So maybe someone that is interested in CBD is also purchasing products that are like reishi mushroom coffee, right? Like that seems sort of related. I'm a health person. It's kind of alternative. So I would go find companies that are selling, mushroom coffee, ashwagandha type of products, go to their Instagram accounts and then see who their audience is. Because those people that are interested in that, adjacent product, it's not a cannabis product, but it's related, that same audience is probably also interested in CBD. So I might start there.
Also, once you got the audience figured out, how do you start creating content around it? How do you create empathy and establish empathy, and how do you actually extend it throughout the experience when the whole objective is for the user to buy the product? So how do you focus on that?
Yeah. Are you thinking more for like marketing content or like on a website? Let's narrow it down a little.
Let's do marketing content. Yeah, because that's a popular thing. Right now, I'm in a dilemma too. I almost spend time on my website because I want to do really good onboarding for design sprints on Webflow and integrate the node code tools and all that stuff. But the low hanging fruits for getting clients right now is LinkedIn. So I kind of like push the website out of the way. So let's focus on the marketing. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we create content marketing with empathy and with a design lens? So one thing that I might do if I was starting a brand from scratch and wanted to create some content, in addition to doing things like the social listening that we talked about, like seeing what other people are talking about on social, is actually doing some informal like user interviews. So just getting on the phone with people that might be your target audience and asking them kind of really open-ended questions that will get them talking about like what do they already know about CBD? Have you heard of it before? What do you think about it? If you were going to look for it, what might you look for? And try to identify, what are the main things that they are looking for the product to do for them? Like what benefits are they most excited by? And then I would try to create content that kind of positions the product around that benefit. Um, and that could be a more direct salesy approach. Like, if one of the benefits is sleep, like you could do an article like literally just about how CBD benefits sleep, like how CBD helps you sleep. But you could also do it like a little bit more top of the funnel, like just an article about sleep trouble in general, like what causes it, and then kind of flow CBD into that article as one of many solutions, and have some links to the product there, because that might capture more people at the top of the funnel. Like maybe I'm not looking for CBD, I'm just looking to learn more about why I can't sleep, right? And I've never heard of CBD, so thinking about those different phases of the customer's problem, like I can't sleep. So first I'm going to search, why can't I sleep? Next I'm going to search like solutions to help me sleep. Then I'm going to realize, oh, there are different solutions. Okay, what's the best solution? Maybe that's another thing I'd look for. So just kind of trying to think about, how the customer is solving their own problem and like the different phases and questions that will come from that. And then it's really just creating content that supports them. Like what do they need to know? Like let's just serve it to them on a silver platter, because that's going to build the most trust.
Do you have any experience? Obviously, you do have experience on that, but it's really, really interesting that you said hop on a call with them and just have a short interview. And I emphasize that for so many years. I think we live in a time that we can create products fairly easily if we take the right approach it with the right mindset and use the right frameworks and all that stuff, and whatever is outside of your control. But how important and how easy it is this day to create a product and actually just do a short user interview, just call them and have one-on-one conversation, and how important that could be for a startup.
Yeah, I mean, so important, right? Like I think it's easier than ever
And it's
to
free, or
yeah.
you could give them a gift card if you want.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's easier than ever to do all of those things. Like it's easier than it ever was before to create and launch a product, whether it's a digital product or even a physical product. Like there's so many options now for like building and launching a product. There's even white labeling, and drop shipping, like so many things that you can do. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that people try to skip over in that early process is getting to know their customers, and jumping forward with a lot of assumptions that they may not even realize that they're assuming, if that makes sense. Like I mean, that's how humans operate. Like it's not a bad thing to have a bunch of assumptions about everything. It's how we operate as humans. I assume if I turn on my faucet, the water will come out, because it's happened before.
Sometimes it doesn't.
Sometimes it doesn't. It's not a guarantee, but I assume that it will, and that's an assumption I'm operating off. It's just how our brains work. But what's dangerous is when we have a bunch of assumptions that we don't even realize, and we move forward without testing those assumptions, and then it turns out that some of them are wrong. And then we're sort of stuck in a position where we have to backtrack after we've done a bunch of work. Like we've launched a product, we did all of this content creation based on an assumption that actually wasn't right. And now we've just wasted a bunch of time. So the earlier and the faster you can just talk to your customers and learn more about them, the more it's going to save you time and money later. Because content creation and design and any type of creative process takes a lot of time and effort. And all of that costs money as well. So sometimes I think for product owners, it can seem like doing a lot of research is costly, and it can seem intimidating and time consuming, and like, oh, we don't have to do this. But I think it's important to reframe it as like spend money and time now to save way more time and money later, because ultimately that's what research is going to do for you.
Well, can we talk a little bit about user personas? And there's this whole thing right now about the user archetypes, I believe, going on. I saw a few articles and the people breaking down micro variables like demographics, psychographics, and all that stuff. How important it is to have a persona in the beginning of the stages of your company,
Yeah, I think personas are interesting because
or an archetype of some sort of profile, I guess, if for general language.
yeah, some type of persona or customer avatar. I've also seen people refer to it as basically like a picture of who your ideal customer is. I think that I think those are valuable. I think it's also important um, to make sure that your avatar is based, or your persona is based on some kind of research. Um, and if it's not based on research, that's still okay, but just go into it knowing that it's a hypothesis. And it's totally fine to have a hypothesized user persona, and then to do some things to test whether or not your persona is what you thought it was. But I think it's important to just be aware of how accurate it is, um, and what the limitations of it are. But I do think it's really important to have, because otherwise you're just sort of aimless, right? Like a persona of some kind gives you a general direction of, who your thing is for, and what it needs to do for them.
You could have multiple personas, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I think most companies do. I don't think it's that useful to have like more than 5 or 6, maybe. Like
Hmm.
that's kind of a lot. I've worked with brands who will come in and start a project with me and be like, okay, here's our 15 personas, and I'm like, you do not. This is not helpful.
How many
Not
marketing funnels are there going to run?
right. I mean, yeah, unless it's like you really have a huge enterprise and 15 personas are for like 5 different business units, that's a different thing. But if you've got one product, you don't need like 25 different personas. It's just not really going to help you focus. Um, but yeah, I think having a handful of different personas is great. And I think it can also help with just sort of inclusion and avoiding bias if you have at least a couple of different personas.
Especially
Uh,
in the cannabis industry, because obviously there's veterans, PTSD, all kind of like people with illnesses, and also the big word that actually doesn't come up is inclusivity, and I'm kind of trying to bring that in conversation.
yeah, I think I mean, it's a little bit of a tangent from your original question, but yeah, I think that's super important, especially in like the healthcare space, which is really what CBD is a part of. Is I think it's classified as like what I don't even know, but something. It's for health, um, and health benefits are a big part of the messaging for any CBD company that I've seen. So yeah, if you're going to be talking to customers about something like health benefits or lifestyle benefits, it can be really dangerous to have like a bunch of exclusionary language, because you don't know who you're excluding and what the impact of that is going to be.
Since you do a lot of web content, I want to talk about e-commerce side, and I guess trends. Let's talk about trends for 2020 that you've been seeing. I've been following, I think it was Yuval from UX writing course, and he's been posting a lot of I've been reading a lot about conversational user interfaces, and that's how I got introduced. Evelina in 2017 in Chicago, she told me to focus on having conversation, and that's the whole thing where it started, conversational UI. I wanted to ask you, what are like the biggest issues that you see today in web content and just in general, like websites that you go on, and especially in the industries that are like heavily regulated?
Yeah, so biggest issues that I tend to see for web content. Um, I think a couple of things. It's 2020 and brands are still not using plain language for some reason. And what I mean by plain language is content and words that general people will understand easily without having to think too much or Google anything. And especially in regulated industries, there's often a lot of terminology that's specific to the industry. And it's really easy to assume that everyone knows what those terms mean, but they don't. And especially if you're a B2C brand, if your audience is just regular people, right? It's important to make sure that your content is in a language and using words that they're already going to know and that they're going to pick up without having to think too hard. I think one of the most famous books about user-centered design is Don't Make Me Think. And the same thing applies to content. Like, why would we want to make people have to think really hard or even really think much at all with our web content? It's just going to make them abandon the page faster and not really remember what they read and not come back to it. So keeping it simple. The other big problem that I see with web content is when interior pages, like not necessarily a homepage, but I'll see a lot of interior pages like services page or a deeper product page that are basically built for SEO, and they're super dense. Like they'll have 1,500 words and they're packed with keywords and it's really long and it's really in depth. And there's nothing wrong with in-depth content. Like a lot of my content is also in-depth. That's great. But there's a balance that you have to strike between SEO and real people. It's not enough anymore just to jam pack your site with a bunch of keywords, because at the end of the day, you still need real people to consume that content. So yeah, I've definitely seen sites that just aren't striking the right balance between, SEO and making it usable and easy to read.
Do you deal with e-commerce stores?
I've done a couple of large e-commerce sites. So yeah, I think even for e-commerce sites, I've seen these things, these issues. The other one for e-commerce sites that I've seen is having a lot of, what's the best way to put it? A lot of like I language, like an e-commerce site with an about page that talks all about the brand's history for the last 50 years or whatever. And like the truth is consumers don't care. They have other needs, right? So let's say it's like a clothing store. And part of their angle is like ethical sourcing of materials.
Mm-hmm.
A user is probably going to the about page to learn more about what benefits they'll get as a consumer. They don't necessarily need to know the CEO's personal life story. They're more concerned about things like, where do you source your materials, and how, where can I get information on shipping, right? Like those are things consumers care more about. And I see a lot of e-commerce sites that really jam-pack their websites with a lot of information about the company that isn't necessarily positioned in a way that consumers care about, for lack of a nicer way to say it.
I had a really good question beforehand. You were talking about, I want to say language, e-commerce, then there was regular websites. The balance between that and then users. Oh, I was going to ask you, since you work on content and you see a lot of data, it's really heavily focused on data. Have you noticed any trends the way people navigate through websites now these days versus like a few years back, since with all the new design trends, the UI styles coming out and all the interactions and the Lodi integrations and all that stuff coming out?
Yeah, sure. I think that, so for e-commerce specifically, or just in general?
Just in general, maybe if you could touch a few things that you saw in e-commerce as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is not necessarily new, but I think we've known for a while that people scan. They don't read every word for word and in the order that you expect them to read it. People are still scanning web content probably more than ever. And you can actually go and read. There are a bunch of really interesting like eye tracking studies that Nielsen Norman Group has published. I think those are really valuable because I think that can tell us a lot about how we should structure websites and structure web content. We have to assume that they're going to scan it. They're not necessarily going to read all of your content in the exact order because people are scrolling up and down. They're jumping around they've scrolled to the bottom, they scroll back up, right? So we have to kind of get out of this mindset that things are really linear and that people are going to experience our content in the exact order and method that we intend it. They're not going to be sitting down reading a Google Doc from start to finish the same way that you would when you write your copy. So we have to assume that they're going to sort of skip through it. And data definitely supports that.
And how about from the e-commerce side?
Yeah, I think same thing for e-commerce. I mean, I think e-commerce sites definitely see a lot more search activity. People, if they're looking for a particular product, or if they're in the later stages of their shopping journey, they've probably looked at the product before they purchased it at least once or twice, or they come to the site knowing that they, want to buy a particular thing. Like they come to your homepage of your clothing site, but they just want to buy jeans, right? So they're going to go and they're just going to try to search for that or find it in the navigation. So that's definitely a trend that I've seen that's supported by data is people will just search for what they want like immediately.
On the website, right? On somebody's website. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll just go to the website. They're not going to scroll down to your homepage. They're just going to search for the item that they want, or they're going to go to the navigation and see if they can find the item that they want in your navigation. Like, are jeans in the nav, right? That's what they're looking for. So I think the more that we can cater to that, the better we can make their shopping experience.
Wow, this was a jam-packed hour. It flew by so fast. Before we run out, I wanted to ask you, what are you working on? What's Avo working on? Any cool projects that you might want to share a peek in and the future of Avo Agency?
Yeah, we're working on a handful of cool projects, mostly in the tech space right now. Currently only working on web projects. We do web and mobile, but right now we're doing a lot of web projects. Obviously they're all under NDA, but but really fun. And I'm working with some really talented writers right now, which I'm super excited about. And what I hope that people can see from us in the future is some good free content. I'm really excited about exploring Instagram and trying to find ways to share content strategy insights and UX writing tips in a bite-sized way on Instagram. So you can definitely follow us there, and we'll see how that goes.
Also, before we head out, any tips for cannabis and hemp industry, since you're coming from a highly regulated background that you could see and kind of relatable to the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say for web content, just thinking about the customer journey in a way that's non-linear and a way that's omni-channel, right? People are gonna look on their Instagram at your products, and they're gonna hop to your website. Then maybe later they're gonna be on their desktop. Maybe they'll go back to their iPhone later. So really just getting out of this mindset that there's a very linear customer journey, because it's just not how people shop anymore. We really have to make sure that people can enter into the shopping experience through all different ways, all different channels on different devices, and still get a good experience. So that's my big takeaway for people to think about.
Cool. Thank you. Bam.